The Isle of Man is a wonderful place for hill walking. Here are some highlights. Adrian Earnshaw and I went out for a day exploring the Laxey mines. The mine shafts still remained uncovered and stones thrown in seemed to take a long time to reach the bottom. Originally the miners descended and ascended by means of a long pole which moved up and down in the shaft, and from which miners would step off and onto steps cut into the side of the shaft. We walked up from Laxey to Agnish, and at the third shaft crawled through a short tunnel from the winding house, which took us through to a sheer vertical drop. Afterwards we had a late lunch with pints of locally brewed bitter in the Miners' Tavern. Mike, Pete and I walked from Laxey to Sky Hill, the site of an ancient Manx battle with the Vikings, and camped at Ohio Plantation. We made the return journey via Mount Carrin, Greba Bridge and Baldwin. One of my favourite places was the abandoned Erie Nisu farm on the westward path out of Baldwin, and situated on the saddle between Colden and Lagi Roo. Beautifully peaceful here, and the sea can be seen on both sides of the island. At the farm I found a chunky cog, about 9 inches diameter, and took it home as an ornament for the garden. On another occasion I walked the 42 miles around the southern coastline from Port Soderick to Peel, sleeping overnight in the hills above Fleshwick Bay, where I watched a goose waddling about as the sun went down. On the final cliff walk into Peel, seagulls dive-bombed me all the way along. Jan and I took the children on a hike from Agnish to the Snaefell mines, Paul and Catherine each carrying a light rucksack containing only a sleeping bag. A man who we met told us off for making our children carry something so heavy. After exploring and sitting by a campfire under the star-filled sky, we settled down for the night in our 2-man tent pitched in a valley full of rabbit holes. On several occasions we got together with the Sale and Erskine families for Optune, the Manx equivalent of Halloween. After the children had put on their masks and visited neighbours' homes singing the Optune song, we played games such as apple dunking. One year we all spent a weekend at the bleak Erie Cushlin Adventure Centre, and on the Saturday walked to the ruins of the 8th century chapel and hermitage, imagining what it would have been like for the monk who had crossed the Irish Sea in a coracle to this place. Then we collected wood and played games around a roaring fire after dinner. Each year we crossed the Irish Sea to spend Christmas and New Year alternately at Billinge and Rotherham. One year we went around the local pubs collecting money for charity with Caroline and her bell-ringing friends. Jan and I joined the Douglas Sub Aqua Club, and after passing the snorkelling tests, attending 20 or so lectures and practice sessions in the pool, we were launched into the sea doing our first aqualung dives at Port Erin. John, who was over on holiday, joined us for this. After several dives around the coast of the island, we both discovered that our ears were not recovering and were quite painful. We decided that we should stop, and one of the last things we did was to attend the sub-aqua fancy dress party at Trafalgar House, where we played some songs. Jan went as Little Bo Peep, I as a South American revolutionary, and Paul went along as a Boy Scout, for which he earned first prize of a koala bear. Jan had been promised a work permit for teaching when I was offered the job in the Isle of Man. However, this was not forthcoming, and she obtained work as assistant to the music advisor Alan Pickard at about a third of teachers' wages. We now needed a second car and did the rounds of the garages, finding the best bargain at DB Autos, where we purchased a Daihatsu Domino, a name unheard of at the time, but a car which kept its value and proved to be very reliable. Jan also began training with the Samaritans, created by Chad Vara in 1953 when he was vicar of St. Stephen's in London. One of my students, Mark Cowan, walked out of an economics lecture without explanation. It was pouring with rain outside as he left the mobile classroom, and his friends told me that he was upset. I asked one of them to check on him that evening. When I heard that no one had been able to make contact with him, I rang Mark's mother. His father went round to his flat and discovered that he had taken a paracetamol overdose, and the doctors could not save him. This convinced me of my thoughts of following in Jan's footsteps, and so I began training with the Samaritans. We introduced Paul and Catherine to Forest School camps, where we had first met in 1972. In Teviotdale, Scotland, they joined the Elves, and we were assistant leaders with the Woodlings. The camp chief was Ron Brand, known as Beefy. Here, Catherine, the youngest in camp, is helping him to say thank you to the farmer for allowing us onto his land. Above is the Pea Fair, with rides on a sedan chair. The Pathfinder group chief was Sam Cutler, who was tour manager for the Rolling Stones in the 1970s, notably at Hyde Park and Altamont. The following year, Jan and I were the Pathfinder group chiefs at Dunnerdale in the Lake District. The group particularly enjoyed the hike that we organised across to Eskdale, taking the railway to Ravenglass and visiting Muncaster Castle, where we had a long chat with the owners, who appeared in a television documentary some 10 years later, explaining why they could no longer afford to live there. We began the search for a new home. Firstly, we were attracted by a wooden house in Laxey called Silversea, whose owner, Mr. Lazzolo, had been a journalist. He was offering his flock of geese as part of the deal. Then our attention turned towards Laxey Vicarage, a real dream. But in the end we decided that it would break the bank to put it in order. Then after a tour of over 20 properties we came upon Cedargate's 2nd Avenue, Douglas. On the market at £80,000 originally, to our delight the owner accepted our offer of £50,000. We hired a transit van and with 6 helpers, Billy Erskine, Mike Casey, Clive Hand, Liz MacArthur, Sue Fraser and Dave Sale, we began the process of moving our possessions. At the end of the day, we all sat down exhausted and enjoyed a meal of fish and chips with beer and elderflower wine. The first thing we noticed was several lights in the house exploding, and found that the pre-war rubber fabric-covered electrical cable was no longer up to the job. With help from an electrical engineer at the college, I drew up a list of equipment needed to rewire the entire house. Then on a trip to the mainland, purchased £1,000 worth of electrical equipment from Mitch Shaw's of Liverpool. It was a big job, and I was helped along by Jeff Key, a fellow lecturer. Towards the end of the year, Jan's dad, Charles Priestley, had a stroke and died on Christmas Eve. The brass band he had played with performed at his crematorium funeral. I remember the evening that I had recently spent with him at a local pub playing dominoes with his friend Bill Robinson. Paul and I returned to the island while Jan and Catherine stayed with Jan's mum, Alice Priestley. And so the work went on. Lights, ring mains, rentacle, plastering, plumbing, toilets, water main, curtain rails and carpets. Through all of this, Paul and I slept and ate and tried to live in the sitting room. Here are some extracts from my diary for January 1984. Sunday the 8th. Spent the whole day preparing the first floor of the house for Rentacle's visit. Saturday the 14th. After a week of plastering, boarding up chimneys and fixing up curtain rail boards, Rentacle arrived and spent the day treating the first floor. I cut out 5 back boxes and laid a ring main cable under the music room floor. Sunday the 15th. Sprayed picture rails and window frames with woodworm killer. Completed wiring in the music room. Made a snowman with Paul. We are both sleeping downstairs until the woodworm treatment has soaked in. Friday the 20th. College Parents' Evening. Paul watched videos on the college TV. Saturday the 21st. Paul went to Summerland with Gavin. I put in wiring for the dining room and took a cable back to the board to complete the dining music room ring main. Tried the paint mate. The pad works well, but the brush is a bit slow. Sunday the 22nd, Paul went to Castletown Baths with Gavin and then to Port Erin. I put in wiring for the kitchen ring main. Saturday the 28th, Paul to Gavin's house for tea. I put down the carpet in our bedroom, boarded up the dining room fireplace and fitted 4 sockets in the kitchen. Put in wiring for the immersion heater and freezer. Tidied up the dining room and kitchen. In March 1984, Alice also died, and after her funeral we spent 4 days at the Billinge house sorting things out. Relatives collected the motorbikes, lathe and welder. Charles's friends were invited to take equipment from his shed and garage, and after several trips to the Oxfam shop we hired express removals from the Isle of Man to carry some items of furniture and equipment back home. I borrowed some scaffolding from the college and began the process of repairing guttering, replacing cracked lead roof valleys and painting gutters and windows. then set about boarding the enormous attic and building a pergola in the garden, concreting 10 10-foot poles into the ground and later fixing 11 more as cross sections. The plan being to grow fruit trees up the sides and over the top. By the summer, we had 2 new fireplaces installed. One day I got fed up with the paint mate, which kept going wrong. So I sat down in the garden with a bottle of wine. Then one by one, quite out of the blue and separately, Dave Sale, Sue Fraser, Keith Organ and Tony Williams appeared, and 3 bottles of wine later, it was midnight. Work on the house continued with papering, a Securicore burglar alarm system installed, sanding the wooden floors and tiling in the porch. Jan set to work building a pond in the centre of the lawn. In October, to celebrate completion of the house and garden, we invited 45 friends to a party, at which the jazz group played.